Okay, so are you ready to dive into it's like the fascinating world of cells? We're about to unpack this chapter from a biochemistry textbook that really breaks down these microscopic factories. And trust me, you're going to look at your own body in a whole new light.
It really is mind-blowing,
Right.
when you think about the sheer complexity happening within like every single cell of your body. It's like a bustling city
Mm.
with different departments, transport systems, even a blueprint room.
I love that analogy, the cell as a city. And the chapter starts off, by comparing a cell to a factory, which makes total sense. We've got import-export systems, production lines, even waste management.
Absolutely. And just like a factory needs blueprints to make its products, cells have DNA.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really cool. Those blueprints aren't like set in stone. You might be surprised to learn that environmental factors can actually change how those blueprints are read and used. It's called epigenetics. And it's like the environment can actually leave its mark on our DNA.
Wait, really? So, like, if I experience a lot of stress, that could potentially impact how my genes are expressed. And not just for me, but even for, like, my future kids.
That's what's so fascinating about epigenetics. It challenges that traditional view that our genes are our destiny. It suggests that our experiences, both good and bad, can have lasting impacts on our biology.
That's wild. Okay, so we've got DNA as our blueprint, but what about the actual construction workers? The chapter dives into this whole process of transcription and translation, where the information in DNA is used to make proteins. It's like deciphering a secret code.
Exactly. And just like any important message, it needs to be delivered to the right place at the right time, right? That's where RNA comes in. You can think of RNA as the messenger, carrying the instructions from the DNA blueprint out to the ribosomes, which are like the assembly lines where proteins are built.
So we've got our blueprints, our messengers, our assembly lines. It's all starting to come together. But the chapter also mentions these things called mutations. What's the deal with those? Are they like typos in the blueprint?
That's a great way to put it. Mutations are essentially changes in the DNA sequence, and they can happen for a variety of reasons, from errors during DNA replication to damage from environmental factors like UV radiation. Now, some mutations are harmless, like a typo that doesn't change the meaning of a sentence, but others can have a big impact, either positive or negative.
Okay, so it's not always bad news. But how do these mutations actually lead to changes in an organism? Like, if I get a mutation in one of my skin cells, does that mean I'll suddenly sprout wings?
Well, probably not wings. But your intuition is right. A single mutation in a single cell is unlikely to have a dramatic effect on the whole organism. However, if that mutation occurs in a germ cell like a sperm or egg, then it has the potential to be passed down to future generations. And over many generations, these accumulated mutations can lead to significant changes in a population, even driving the evolution of new species.
That makes sense. It's like a game of telephone, where each whispered message represents a generation. Over time, those small changes can add up to something completely different. But before we get too far down the evolutionary road, let's go back to those individual cells. This chapter blew my mind when it talked about how crowded it is in there. I never imagined it like that.
It's true. It's not just a spacious factory floor. It's more like rush hour in a packed subway car with molecules constantly bumping into each other.
So how does anything get done in all that chaos?
That's the beauty of it. Cells have evolved to thrive in this crowded environment. In fact, some enzymes, those are the proteins that speed up chemical reactions,
Hmm.
actually work better under these crowded conditions. It's like they've learned to use the chaos to their advantage.
Whoa, it's like they've adapted to make the most of a packed dance floor, right?
Precisely. This crowding has actually influenced how cells have evolved. It's a fascinating example of how even the physical environment inside a cell can shape the course of evolution.
So we've got these super crowded cells, all packed with molecules bumping into each other. It's like a mosh pit at a concert in there. So how do they actually move around? It's not like they have, you know, tiny little cars or anything.
Well, you're right. It's not tiny cars. It's more like this complex network of roads and highways, all within the cell. That's where the cytoskeleton comes in. Think of it like, the cell's internal scaffolding,
Yeah.
provides structure and support and all that. But, and this is cool, it's not just like static beams and walls. The cytoskeleton, it's made of these dynamic protein filaments that can like actually assemble and disassemble on demand, which allows the cell to change its shape, move, even transport things around internally.
So like a dynamic scaffolding system that can rearrange itself depending on what the cell needs at any given moment. That's even cooler than those tiny cars I was picturing.
Exactly. Imagine like a construction crew that can instantly build or take down walls, bridges, highways, all within the cell to make sure everything runs smoothly.
Okay, that's seriously impressive. It really makes you wonder, though, if the cell's like this bustling city, how do all these different parts communicate with each other? Do they have like a tiny postal service for molecular messages?
They do have a communication system, but it's way faster and more sophisticated than snail mail. It's called cell signaling, and it involves this complex language of chemical messages that cells use to coordinate their activities.
So instead of letters and postcards, we're talking about molecules acting as couriers, carrying messages from one part of the cell to another.
You got it. These molecular messengers can be hormones, neurotransmitters, or even just local mediators that act within a specific neighborhood of the cell. And just like any coded message, they need the right recipient to, decipher it and act on its instructions.
Oh, there must be a system to make sure those messages get to the right place then.
Absolutely. This is where those molecular couriers meet their match receptors. Imagine it like a lock and key system, where each messenger molecule has a specific shape that fits perfectly into a corresponding receptor on the surface of the target cell.
It's incredible how cells can tell the difference between all these tiny molecules just floating around, especially in that crowded environment. It's like finding like one specific person in a packed stadium.
It really is incredibly precise, and that specificity is crucial, for making sure that the right signals are received and acted upon.
So the message is delivered, then what? How does the cell actually respond to these molecular memos?
Well, once a signal molecule binds to its receptor, it sets off this whole cascade of events inside the cell, kind of like a domino effect. These signaling pathways, as we call them, are like intricate relay races, with each molecule passing the baton to the next until the message reaches, ultimately, the nucleus, where it can influence which genes are turned on or off.
It's wild to think about these complex chain reactions happening all the time within our cells, all in response to these tiny molecular messengers. With a system this intricate, though, there have to be some backup plans, right? What happens if a signal gets lost or misinterpreted?
That's a great point. Cells have actually evolved multiple ways to achieve the same outcome, which ensures that even if one pathway is disrupted, there are alternative routes to make sure that message gets through. It's like having a backup generator in case of a power outage.
Oh, that's reassuring. It sounds like cells have this remarkable ability to adapt and keep things running smoothly, even when there are these unexpected challenges.
Exactly. And one of the most critical processes they regulate is their own growth and division. The chapter dives into the cell cycle, a tightly controlled sequence of events that governs how cells replicate their DNA and divide into two daughter cells.
So it's like a carefully choreographed dance, making sure that each step happens in the right order and at the right time.
Precisely. And there are checkpoints throughout the cycle, kind of like quality control inspections, to make sure everything's in order before moving on to the next stage.
What happens if something goes wrong during this process, though? Like if a cell misses a step in the dance or fails the quality control check?
Well, that's when things can get a little tricky. If those errors aren't corrected, it can lead to uncontrolled cell division, which, as you might know, is a hallmark of cancer.
That's a sobering reminder of how important these regulatory mechanisms are for maintaining not just cellular health, but, our overall well-being.
Absolutely. And honestly, this chapter only scratches the surface of these incredibly complex processes.
It's mind-boggling to think about all of this intricate machinery operating inside every single cell of our bodies. It makes you really appreciate the elegance and sophistication of life at the molecular level, but it also makes you realize how much we still don't know.
That's the beauty of science, right? There's always more to learn and discover.
Speaking of discoveries, I was so fascinated by this section on organic molecules. It's amazing to think that, everything around us, from the food we eat to the clothes we wear, it's all ultimately made up of these same building blocks of life: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids.
You're totally right. And it all starts with carbon, the backbone of all organic molecules. And this chapter does a great job at explaining, the properties of carbon that make it so versatile. It can form this incredible diversity of molecules that make up living organisms.
It's like carbon is the ultimate tinker-toy connector. It can bond with itself and other atoms in seemingly endless ways to create this huge variety of molecular structures.
Exactly. What's even cooler is how those structures actually dictate the function of those molecules.
Right, they talked about functional groups, those specific arrangements of atoms that give a molecule its like unique chemical personality. It's like adding accessories to a basic outfit to create a whole new look.
I like that analogy.
Hmm.
Those functional groups determine how a molecule is going to interact with other molecules, how it's going to participate in chemical reactions, all that. They're essential for understanding how organic molecules behave.
Right, like those hydrophobic molecules they mentioned,
Mm.
the ones that are repelled by water, like oil, and then there are hydrophilic molecules, which are attracted to water, like sugar dissolving in your coffee. It's like a microscopic dance floor, with some molecules clinging to the water molecules, others trying to avoid them.
Uh-huh. I love that. It's a great M&A. And that hydrophobic effect, that's what they call it, is a major driving force in a lot of biological processes. For example, did you know that the way proteins fold into their unique 3D shapes is largely driven by the tendency of hydrophobic amino acids to bury themselves in the interior of the protein, away from all those water molecules?
Wow. It's really amazing how those like fundamental principles of chemistry that we maybe remember from high school, like oil and water don't mix, actually play out in such complex and elegant ways in biological systems.
It really does highlight how biology is, at its core, applied chemistry.
And physics too. They didn't shy away from those laws of thermodynamics, which I'll be honest, I always found a little bit intimidating.
Well, they're fundamental laws. They govern everything in the universe, including, the chemical reactions that sustain life.
Right, like that whole energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed
Mm.
thing. And then there's that second law, the one about entropy always increasing.
Yes, entropy, a measure of disorder. That second law tells us that the universe has this natural tendency to move toward greater disorder. So for a chemical reaction to occur spontaneously, it has to either release energy, which we call exothermic, or increase the entropy of the system.
And yet, here we are, these incredibly complex and organized beings, seemingly defying the universe's push for chaos.
It seems paradoxical, but cells have evolved these really ingenious ways to make those unfavorable reactions happen. Oftentimes, they couple them to reactions that are energetically favorable, like the hydrolysis of ATP, which releases energy.
It's like they figured out how to cheat the system, at least locally, to maintain their highly ordered structure and function.
Exactly. Nature is full of these elegant solutions. And understanding these fundamental principles of chemistry and physics is crucial for really appreciating the true beauty and complexity of life.
It's like cells found like a cheat code for the universe's rules to create these pockets of order and complexity. It's mind-blowing.
It really is. And speaking of bending the rules, the chapter mentions these things called phase transitions, which I thought were fascinating.
Phase transitions, like what are we talking about? Cells turning into solids or liquids or gases or something?
Well, not exactly, but you're thinking along the right lines. Think about how water can be ice, right?
Yeah.
Or liquid water or steam. Those are different phases of the same molecule, but they each have these totally unique properties. Similar phase transitions can actually happen inside cells. It's how those specialized structures with really distinct characteristics are able to form.
Okay, now you've got me really curious. Give me an example.
Okay, so take lipid rafts, for example. So these are I think of them as these exclusive clubs, but they exist within the cell membrane. And what happens is certain types of lipids, they all cluster together.
Right.
And because they end up packing together more tightly than the membrane around them, it's like they create this distinct microenvironment with its own unique properties.
So it's like these lipids are having a party and only certain molecules are on the guest list.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just about who's invited. It's also about how how the party's set up, right? The way these lipids are packed together in those rafts. It can impact which proteins are going to be recruited to the area, which then affects things like cell signaling and membrane trafficking.
Wow. So these tiny little rafts have a big impact on how the whole cell functions. It's like there's this whole other level of organization within the already organized world of the cell.
It's true. And it doesn't just happen with lipids either. Scientists are finding more and more evidence that proteins, especially the proteins that interact with RNA, they can go through these phase transitions too, forms these RNA protein complexes. Those are super important. Things like ribosomes.
So from those bustling ribosomes to those super exclusive lipid rafts, it seems like cells are experts at creating order and structure within what seems like a chaotic environment. But what about those basic building blocks we keep talking about, the primary metabolites? How do those fit into all of this?
Primary metabolites. Those are like the raw materials that are shipped to our cellular factory, right?
Yeah.
We're talking those simple sugars, amino acids, fatty acids. They're like the essential ingredients for building everything else.
And then those ingredients are assembled into those bigger macromolecules, carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, nucleic acids. Those are like the departments in our factory, each with a very specialized role.
Exactly. And remember how we were talking about those dehydration synthesis reactions? Those assembly lines that link all those smaller units together? That's how you go from simple building blocks to these large, complex macromolecules that do all the work, that carry out all of life's essential functions.
It's amazing how it's all connected, like from those tiny molecules to those huge cellular structures and processes. I do have to ask, though, with all this talk about factories and blueprints and construction, is there like a foreman in charge of the cell? Like, who's calling the shots?
Ah, that's the million-dollar question. And honestly, while we use all these analogies, to wrap our heads around this complexity, the reality is even more mind-blowing. Cells don't have a single foreman calling the shots. It's more like this self-governing system, this intricate web of interconnected regulatory networks that all respond to both internal and external cues to keep everything running smoothly.
So it's less about like a top-down hierarchy and more about this dynamic network of communication and feedback loop.
Exactly. It's this constant dance between, the environment, the cell's own internal state, and its genetic blueprint. And that's what determines which products are made, when they're made, and how much is made.
Wow. This deep dive has been honestly incredible. We've gone from the bustling streets of our cellular cities to the intricate machinery of its factories. We've uncovered this hidden language of cell signaling, the elegant dance of molecular interactions. It's really amazing to think about the complexity in every single one of our trillions of cells, all orchestrated by those basic laws of chemistry and physics.
It really is. And you know what's even more exciting? We're only just starting to understand it all. There's still so much more for us to learn and discover about these microscopic universes we call cells.
And that's what makes it so captivating. To leave you with something to think about, if our cells are constantly adapting to the environment, how might the choices we make, the food we eat, the air we breathe, the stress we experience, how might those choices impact the inner workings of these intricate factories? It's something to think about as we go about our lives and make decisions each and every day.